Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding Mishnah Berurah Chelik Vav. In today's video we will be learning Mir Hashem Daf Kuf lost the place. We will be learning Daf Kuf Yud Gimel Amid Beis. We are continuing to learn the halachas of the Daled Minim, and we're holding in Siman Taf Reish Mum Vav Taf Reish Mem Vav. And we pick up today near the bottom of Kuf Yud Gimel Amid Aleph with Siman Taf Reish Mem Vav Sif Gimel, discussing the halachas of the hadasim. Now, before we begin to read the Shulchan Aruch, I want to take you to a Gemara in Sukkah on Daf Lamed Beis Amid Beis. The Gemara brings down a brisa describing hadasim, and the brisa says as follows: Tana, we learned in a brisa, Eitz Avos kosher. The Torah Kedosha calls for us to take a anaf eitz avos, the branch of a plaited or a braided tree. So eitz avos kosher. If it is an eitz avos, if it is indeed plaited, braided, interwoven, then it is kosher. V'she'enoi avos, but if it is not avos, pasul, then the hadas is pasul. Frek the Gemara, heichidami avos. What does avos mean? What does that mean, avos? What is the exact description of the hadas branch when we say that it has to be avos? Amar Rav Yehuda says, Fahu dekaimi tlasa tarpi. An anaf eitz avos is when we have 3 leaves, bikina, in each one of the bases. At every level of the hadas, at the bud, or the, I'm not sure what other word you want to use, at the node maybe, where the leaves emerge, if you have 3 leaves on every level, that's what's called avos. Because when you have 3 leaves, you are now going to have a situation where the branch of the hadas is going to be surrounded with leaves, and it's going to be covered up, and the leaves are going to go up and overlap each other. We'll discuss the question of overlapping a little bit later in today's share, hopefully. But you have the branch surrounded by the leaves, and on every level you have 3. That gives a plaited look, and that is what's called anaf eitz avos. So this is a very critical line in the Gemara here in the Brisa. Amar Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda says, what constitutes avos? Fahu dekaimi tlasa tarpi bikina. When we have a hadas mishulish, when we have 3 leaves coming out from each cane, from each base, that's what's called anaf eitz avos. Now we have a memra of Rav Kahana. Rav Kahana says, afilu trei v'chad. Even if you have 2 leaves coming out on one level, and then you have chad, and then you have 1 additional leaf that is a little bit higher or a little bit lower than the other 2, that, says Rav Kahana, is also avos. Rav Acha brei de Rava, Rav Acha the son of Rava, mahader atrei v'chad. Rav Acha the son of Rava, he actually looked for a hadas that was trei v'chad. He wanted a hadas that had 2 leaves on one level and a 3rd leaf either higher or lower. Why? Hayil v'nafik mipume de Rav Kahana. He was a Talmud of Rav Kahana. He heard his Rebbe address this type of hadas, the hadas that's trei v'chad, and he heard Rav Kahana say that it's kosher. Therefore, it was beloved to Rav Acha brei de Rava, and therefore he was mahader to go ahead and get that kind of hadas. Now, there's a couple of Rashis over here that I want to quote. First of all, we had Rav Yehuda in the Brisa who said what is considered avos, that's the hadas mishulish. And the way Rav Yehuda described the hadas mishulish, his words were, V'hu dekaimi tlasa tarpi bikina. You have 3 leaves coming from 1 cane. A cane is a base, a bud, a nodule, a stem. It's 3 leaves coming from the same source on the branch. Rashi says, tlasa b'chad kina. That means shloisha alin, 3 leaves, bekain echad, on 1 base, yotzin mitoich ukatz echad. They all come from one source. They all come up on one stem. That's the shita of Rashi. And we're going to see that we don't paskin like Rashi. Rashi's description of the hadas mishulish is that if you would look at the branch of the hadas, all three leaves are emerging from exactly the same spot on the branch. They have one ukitz, one stem, one united stem, and from that stem comes three branches. The Achrayim say if we wanted to find hadasim like Rashi, we wouldn't find hadasim. It's come out not shaykh to find hadasim like this, but that is the shita of Rashi. Then we had Rav Kahana. Rav Kahana said if we have a hadas where we have two leaves on one level and a third leaf either a little higher or a little lower, Rav Kahana said that that's also kosher, that's also called avos. And we had Rav Acha Brei Rava who was mahader to get that kind of hadas. Very nice Rashi. Rashi says mahader atrei v'chad. Rav Acha Brei Rava was mahader. He went bedafka to look for that kind of hadas. Says Rashi, Afal gav de tlosa b'chad kina kol shekein de kosher. Why was Rav Acha Brei Rava being mahader after the hadas that was 2 and 1? Was Rav Acha Brei Rava suggesting that according to Rav Kahana, a hadas mishulish that has all three leaves on the same level is not good, or maybe it's not as good, and 2 and 1 is perhaps better than the mishulish? Says Rashi, no, absolutely not. Certainly, the hadas mishulish as described by Rabbi Yehuda is kol shekain. That's certainly good. Rav Kahana was saying a chiddush that the 2 and 1 is also good. Hoyel v'nafik mipube to Rav Kahana. However, since Rav Acha Brei Rava heard this halacha from Rav Kahana, that made it chavivale, that somehow made it beloved to him, and therefore he was mahader after that kind of hadas. Okay, so now we have seen the brisa that's going to serve as the basis for much of today's shiur. So now let's take a look. Siman Tafresh Mem Vav Sif Gimel Kuf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph, 2 lines off the bottom in the Shulchan Aruch, Sif Gimel. Says the Mechaber, Anaf eitz avos ha'amar b'Torah. When the Torah HaKadosh tells us that we have to take for part of the daled minim an anaf eitz avos, the branch of a plaited tree, what does that mean? Hu hadas, this is the hadas she'olav chayfin es eitzai, where the leaves cover up, they cover over the branch. Kegain, for example, shloisha olin a yoser begivail echad. For example, where you have 3 leaves or more, says the Mechaber, 3 leaves or more, begivail echad, emerging from one spot on the branch. Now, let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Yud. Says the Mishnah Berurah, begivail echad. The words of the Mechaber are that the 3 leaves come from one givail. Now, exactly what is the translation of the word givail? I've seen stem, I've seen other words, but the Mishnah Berurah comes here lahalacha to tell us what this means. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ritzaynai loymar, what the Mechaber wants to say is, Bechol kain v'kain, at each base, meaning at each level on the branch where there are leaves coming out, you should have 3 leaves. V'yiyu smuchim ze lo ze. The 3 leaves should be close to each other. The point of emergence off of the branch should be close to each other. Be'igul echad, in one circle, so that you have 3 branches emerging, 3 leaves emerging on the same level, close to each other, encircling the branch. She'ein echad namuch mechaveroi, one is not lower than the other. Afal pi shekol echad be'uktzoi, even though each leaf has its own stem. So this is not like Shitas Rashi. This is in contrast to the Rashi that I read to you. Rashi seems to require that all 3 leaves come from one ukitz, right? Was that the word of Rashi? I think Rashi used the word ukitz. Rashi said, yes, shloisha olin b'kein echad yoitzin mitoich ukatz echad. Rashi wanted that all three leaves come from one ukutz, one stem. Says the Mishnah Berurah that the Mechaber is saying not that way. When the Mechaber says begivoil echad, what the Mechaber means, says the Mishnah Berurah, that they're on the same level and they're close to each other and they're in a circle encircling the branch of the hadas, but afal pi shekal echad beuktzoi, even though each branch has its own independent stem. Okay, now, so far we've seen here in the Mechaber says, what is anaf eitz avos? Anaf eitz avos is this branch where at every level you have 3 or more leaves coming out on the same level, encircling the branch. That's what's called a anaf eitz avos. Continues the Mechaber, let's turn back to Kuf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph, continues the Mechaber on the bottom line. Avol, however, im hayu shnei ha'olim b'shaveh zeh keneged zeh, let's say we have 2 leaves that are on the same level. Ve'ha'ola shlishi, but the third leaf, lamayla mehem, the third leaf is a little bit higher than the other 2, or, says the Mishnah Berurah, nice cut in Yud Aleph, lamayla mehem, oy lamata mehem, or the third leaf is a little bit lower than the other 2, then, says the Mechaber, ein zeh avos, this is not called an anaf eitz avos. In this case, you don't have 3 leaves encircling the branch at the same level. You have 2 leaves that are on the same level, and then you have a third leaf either lower or higher than the other 2. Now, that's not an anaf eitz avos. That's not a plaited tree, because the leaves are not covering over the branch all at the same level. You have a bare spot. You have 2 leaves that are coming up at the same spot, encircling the branch, but then the third leaf is higher or lower. So there's a point on the branch that is not properly covered. That, says the Mechaber, is a chesaron in avos. And that's going to be a very critical thing that I just said. Ein zeh avos, says the Mechaber. Now, this is not an anaf eitz avos. Avol, however, nikra hadas shoite. This is called a deranged hadas. It's a hadas shoite. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut in Yud Beis, nikra hadas shoite. This is called a hadas shoite, mipnei she'ein olav holchin kiseder, because the leaves are not stable. They're not arranged in the proper way. They don't go in the proper seder. Ela mishuboshin. They're messed up. Kishoite. They're deranged, like a shoite. The shoite doesn't think straight. So this hadas is not straight. Its leaves are not arranged in the proper way. They're out of order. The shoite is out of order. This hadas is out of order. And therefore, this is not an anaf eitz avos. And now let's go back into the Shulchan Aruch to the words of the Ramah, Haga u'posel. And this hadas shoite is posel, afilu b'shas atchak. The Ramah says that even b'shas atchak, this hadas is posel. So again, having seen the background that we saw in the Brisa on Lamud Beis, we saw the sheet of Rav Kahana. Rav Kahana said, if you have 2 leaves on one level and the third leaf either up or down, Rav Kahana said that that's okay. Rav Achabrei de Rava was Mahader after that hadas. Comes the Mechaber over here together with the Ramah, and the Mechaber says, no, that is not a kosher hadas. Why, says the Mechaber? Because ein zeh avos. That's not called avos. That's not called an anaf eitz avos. It's not plated. And the Mechaber adds that it is called, it's described as a hadas shoite. Now, the fact that it's a hadas shoite, that is not the source of the psul. That's a name. That's a nickname that we give it. So when we're climbing hadasim, when we're looking through hadasim, and we see a hadas that's 2 in 1, we could pick it up and say, oh, look, a hadas shoite. But that's not the source of the psul. The source of the psul is that it's not avos. That's not what the Torah wants. The Torah says, anaf eitz avos. This is not avos, and says the Ramah, u'posel afilu b'shas atchak. Even b'shas atchak, this is the only hadas that you have. Says the Ramah, this is posel. Let's take a look here in the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Katan Yud Gimel. The Ramah said, afilu b'shas atchak. It's posel afilu b'shas atchak. Why? Says the Mishnah Berurah, she'enoi bechlal hadas klal, because this is not a hadas. So again, it's not a psul, let's say in hidur. It's not that it's a hadas shoita, it's a deranged hadas, so it's not muhuder. It's not a hadas. Why is it not a hadas? Because a hadas is an anaf eitz avos, and this is not anaf eitz avos. Upasal afilu b'shar hayamim, and therefore this is going to be puzzle for the entirety of Yom Tov. If you look at the Shar Tzion, Ais Kat Yud Beis, he brings this down from the Beis Yosef. This hadas is puzzle for the entirety of Yom Tov. It's not only puzzle on the first day of Yom Tov when Daled Minim is Daraisa, it's puzzle for the entirety of Yom Tov because it's not a hadas. You don't have hadasim. Continues the Mishnah Berurah here, and this is going to be very important for the rest of this year. V'cheinim hayu shnayim zeh al gav zeh. Let's say you don't have a hadas mishulish, and you also don't have a hadas shoita. You don't have three on the same level, but it's not a hadas shoita. It's not two on one level, and then one above or one below. No, you don't have three at all. You have two on the same level. Is that okay? Says the Mishnah Berurah, no. That has the same problem. Two leaves on the same level is not an anaf eitz avos, because when you have two leaves on the same level, two leaves are not sufficient to cover the branch. In order to cover the branch, you need three leaves. So three leaves is what makes anaf eitz avos. Two leaves does not make anaf eitz avos. And therefore, in essence, two leaves is the same psul as the hadas shoita. It's not an anaf eitz avos. So I think one of the things that the Mishnah Berurah is coming to tell you over here is, the Mishnah Berurah is coming to point out what I pointed out to you. Don't think that the psul of the hadas shoita is that it's a hadas shoita, it's deranged, but if that third leaf that's in the wrong position would be gone, and you would only have two leaves on every level, and the two leaves would be on the same level, then it's not a hadas shoita. Maybe that's okay. No, it's not okay, because it's not avos. The hadas shoita is not avos, and the hadaf that's 2, 2, 2, 2 is also not avos, and therefore it is puzzle. Okay, let's pause here for a second, and I want to go back to Kuf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph, and bring your attention to a Sharei Tshuva. If you look at the Sharei Tshuva, in my print, it's 2 lines off the bottom of the body of the Sharei Tshuva. I think I have a Dirshu Mishnah Berurah here as well, so I can tell you if it's in the same place. Yes, it is. We have Sharei Tshuva, Dibur Hamaschil, Anaf Eitz Avos, where he brings down an interesting halacha. Says the Sharei Tshuva, V'kasav b'maru Ketzia, in the Sefer Maru Ketzia it's brought down, hadas she'en olim shaloi roishoi shel zeh magia le'uktzoi shel zeh. Let's say you have a hadas that seems to meet all the requirements. It's a hadas mishulish. It has 3 leaves coming out b'chol kain v'kain, 3 leaves coming out on every level, and they're unified, they're all on the same level, but the leaves on each level, the tip of the leaves, do not reach the bottom of the leaves of the next level. So it's very nice. You have 3 leaves coming up, and then up here you have 3 leaves coming up, but between here and here, the branch is exposed. So the branch is not thoroughly covered. What's the halacha in that case? The Mechaber, the Ramah, they don't address that case over here. They say you need a hadas mishulish in order to call it anaf eitz avos, but in this case that I'm describing, it is a hadas mishulish. You have 3 leaves begiv al echad at every level, and they're all on the same level, but you have distinct areas where the branch is not encircled by leaves, because the leaves on each level do not reach the leaves on the next level. Says the Sharei Tshuva, puzzle. The Maru Ketzia says that hadas is puzzle, mikal v'chomer de lulav. He brings a kal v'chomer from lulav. We learned already in the previous Siman that if you have a lulav where the tip of each leaf on each level doesn't reach the bottom of the leaf above it, so that the shedra is not surrounded by leaves, we learned that that's puzzle. Says the Maru Ketzia, what seems to be a very logical kal v'chomer. If it's puzzle by lulav, it should certainly be puzzle by a hadas. Why? Because, says the Shari Tshuva, koshkein bazeh, if it's possible by lulav, certainly it should be possible by a hadas, the golfinan mikra, because here by a hadas we learn out from a pasuk, the be'inan anafav chayfim es. One of the Torah's actual description of the hadas is anaf eitz avos, that the leaves have to plate, they have to surround the branch of the hadas. So if the Torah Dirshu describes the hadaf as an anaf eitz avos, certainly you need the tips of the leaves on one level to reach the base of the leaves on the upper level. If you see that you need that by a lulav, where a lulav is not called an anaf eitz avos, so by the anaf eitz avos, certainly you should use that. So the Shari Tshuva is bringing down what seems to be a very compelling argument why that's what the halacha should be. However, I'm not going to go into it now, but if you take a look at the Dirshu Mishnah Berurah, it's in the back on page 74, Dirshu footnote number 12. He brings down this Shari Tshuva, and he brings down the Bikurei Yaakov and the Chazon Ish that take issue with this Shari Tshuva, and he brings down the Chazon Ish over here, and you can take a look at that Dirshu footnote number 12. It's an interesting footnote that goes through this Shari Tshuva. Okay, now let's go weiter. Okay, so we saw over here so far in the Mechaber and the Ramah, the anaf eitz avos is the hadas. The hadas has to be mishulish. The Mechaber said you could have 3 or more leaves on each level, but you have to have at least 3 leaves coming out at the same level surrounding the branch. If it's a hadas shoita, if you have 2 on the same level, a 3rd leaf on a different level, either higher or lower, the Mechaber said that's a hadas shoita. The Ramah said it's puzzle. Not only is it puzzle, it's puzzle afilu b'shas Tahnk. And we had over here the Mishnah Berurah in Ois Katan Yud Gimel, who told us that the same is true if it's not a hadas shoita, but it only has 2 leaves on each level. That's also puzzle, because that's also not called anaf eitz avos. Now let's continue the Ramah. The Ramah says on the second line, the first word of the line, however, you should know, ve'eka manda amar b'Gemara, there is a manda amar in the Gemara on Daf Lamed Beis Amud Beis, and this is the sheet of Rav Kahana that we learned, the kosher, who says that the hadas shoita, 2 and 1, Rav Kahana said it's kosher. And if you remember, Rav Acha Breda Rava was mahader after that type of hadas. And therefore the Ramah says, V'alkein nagin be'elu hamedinos, and therefore says the Ramah, in his regions there were noyeg lichatchila, lotzeis to be yotze the mitzvah, be'elu hadasim hamuvaim, with the hadasim that were imported into their regions, which apparently, it's going to come out later, apparently those hadasim were 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. Ve'en shloisha oled begiv alechad, even though they did not have, they weren't mishulish, they didn't have 3 coming off at the same level. And yet, there were noig lechatchila that you could use them because of this shita of Rav Kahana in the Gemara. Okay, let's take a look at Mishnah Berurah's Katan Yud Daled. The kosher of alkein noagin, ritzarnoi loymar. What the Ramah wants to say over here is, Desoimchin al oisan manda amar, they're relying on Rav Kahana in the Gemara, who says that the hadas shoita 2-1, 2-1, 2-1 is kosher. The machsher betray v'chad, they're relying on him. Rav Kahana said it's kosher 2-1, 2-1, 2-1. V'hu hadin betray al gabe tray, and they said if 2-1, 2-1, 2-1 is kosher, even though it's not avos, it doesn't seem to be avos. 2 leaves on the same level do not make it avos, and the 3rd leaf doesn't help. If anything, the 3rd leaf makes it worse because now it's a hadas shoita. But they said if Rav Kahana says that trei v'chad is kosher, then they assumed that trei v'trei 2, 2, 2, 2, 2 is also kosher, and therefore they were noig to use the hadasim that were imported into their areas. Now, if you take a look at the Shari Tzion Ois Katan Yud Gimel, the Chavetz Chaim says, Ayin beBikurei Yaakov, the Mispalei, the Bikurei Yaakov says this is a pella. The Eilo says, Shum Mikar Lahakel, Af La'isei Manda Amar. He says, there's no makar at all to be makel on tray. Rav Kahana is makel by tray v'chad. No, first of all, we don't paskel like Rav Kahana. Second of all, maybe Rav Kahana was makel by tray v'chad. Maybe he held at least there is a third leaf, so at least that side of the branch is being covered by the third leaf, even if there's a gap in height between that one leaf and the other two, but at least where the third leaf is, the branch is being covered. So you're showing me Rav Kahana was makel by tray v'chad. Now you want to extend Rav Kahana's kula to tray v'tray? The Berurah Yaakov says it's a pella. You can't imagine what the source for that is. Now let's go weiter in the Ramah. So far the Ramah said, since we have this shita of Rav Kahana, who is makel by a hadas shoita, so in his regions they were noig l'chatchila to use the imported hadasim, even though those imported hadasim were tray v'tray. Continues the Ramah, third line down near the beginning of the line. V'yesh misha kasav, there are those that say the hadasim shalanu, this is the Ramah speaking, that our hadasim, which were the 2, that's going to be very apparent for what he says now, ein nikroim hadas shoita. So again, the imported hadasim in the regions of the Ramah were not tray v'chad. They weren't 2-1. They were tray v'tray. They were 2. The Ramah just said, based on Rav Kahana, they were makel and they used those hadasim l'chatchila. Now the Ramah is saying, v'yesh mishakasav, there are those that write that not only could we be makel to use 2, based on Rav Kahana, who's makel by 2-1, maybe there's even a stronger reason to be makel by 2. Because hadasim shalanu ein nikram hadas shoita. Hayil v'hem shnayim al gav shnayim. Ve'enam ka hadas shoita niskar b'gemara. So the Ramah is suggesting now like this. First, the Ramah said, we have the shita of Rav Kahana, who's makel by tray v'chad. Based on the kula of Rav Kahana, who's makel by tray v'chad, we were also makel on our hadasim, which are tray. Meaning, Rav Kahana says tray v'chad is okay. So if tray v'chad is okay, even though it's not really avos, it only has 2 leaves on one level, not 3 leaves on one level. But if Rav Kahana says that that's okay, it's not a chesaron of 8 avos, so we can be makel by 2. Because in essence, when it comes to the question of avos, 2 and 2-1 are maybe the same. In both cases, you only have 2 leaves on the same level. So if Rav Kahana is makel by tray v'chad, we could rely on Rav Kahana, we could be makel by tray v'tray also. Now the Ramah, with this v'yesh v'shakasav, is saying, maybe there's even more of a reason to be makel by 2. Maybe 2 is actually better than 2-1. Why? Because 2-1 is a hadas shoita. It's deranged. It's not the way a hadas is supposed to be. And that's maybe even a bigger chesaron. But 2 is not a hadas shoita. So maybe there's even more of a reason why we could be makel. Hayil v'hem shnayim agav shnayim ve'enam kadas shoita niska b'gemara. V'lachein, and therefore, says the Ramah, 3 lines from the bottom by the Ois Katan Tezvav for the Mishnah Berurah, v'lachein, therefore, nagu lahakal, we are noig to be makel, and we use the 2, k'maisha kasav mahari kailan u'mahari iser lanzal b'tshuva yisayim. Okay, let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Katan Tezvav. Excuse me. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Katan Tezvav, v'lachein nagu lahakel, ayin bebir agra u'b'sharei achronim. The Chavetz Chaim says, look at the bir agra and the rest of the achronim. She'kulam pikpeku ma'oid ala minig hahu. They're all mefakfek on this minig of allowing the use of a hadas that's 2, or the hadas shoita 2-1. She'ein lehem shum yisoid. There's no basis for such a kula. Loi b'trei v'chad, not by the 2-1. V'loi b'trei al gabe trei. There's no source for such a kula at all. We don't paskin like Rav Kahana. And we certainly can't extend Rav Kahana to 2, and there's no logic to say that 2 is better because it's not a chesaron of hadas shoita. The Gra, the other achrayim, they say there's no sorts for these kulas. The Ramah, v'harama dochak rak lekayim aminig. The Ramah, and we see this in other poskim, even by contemporary poskim, the Ramah was stuck. That was the widespread minig. And the Ramah found himself in a position where he had to be malamet zchus. He had to come up for a basis for the minig. You cannot always fight the minig. If that's what everybody does, we got to find a source to justify it. So the Ramah pressed, and he found a source to justify it. But as far as halacha l'maisa, as far as we're concerned, says the Mishnah Berurah, v'lachein, therefore, hayarei l'dvar Hashem, somebody who has yirah shamayim, yitrach, he should exert himself, limtzai avos kadin, to find an anaf eitz avos that is properly considered an anaf eitz avos kadin. Dahainu, which means shloisha olin, 3 leaves b'shaveh, on the same level, b'chol kain v'kain, a hadas b'shulush. V'ayin l'kamei b'sifhei. Kosav HaChayadam, the Chayadam writes, de b'soich elu hayaveshim shemeviim im ha'esrayim. In the time of the Chayadam, it was common that they would import hadasim together with the Yisrayim. So the importers would be bringing in the daled minim, and the hadasim would come together with the Yisrayim, but they were very dried out. They were yaveshim. The b'soich elu hayaveshim, amongst these dried out hadasim, shemeviim im ha'esrayim, that come together with the Yisrayim, b'doichik nimtze echad l'meya, sheyesh bo shloisha b'kein echad. The Chayyadim says, b'doichik, you might find 1 in 100 of the hadasim that are b'shaloshim. V'lachein, and therefore says the Chayyadim, ein lehem cheskas kashrus, those hadasim do not have a cheskas kashrus, ad sheyashreim b'chamin, until you soak them in warm water to reconstitute them and make them moist, v'yarakech, so that you could soften them up in order to be able to check them. So the Chayyadim was giving a practical psak for his time and his region. He said, you should know, these hadasim are going to come together with the Yisrayim, they're dried out, and you can't check them, you can't know if they're Mishuloshim or not, and I'm telling you, only 1 out of 100 are Mishulish, and therefore they don't have a Cheskes Kashrus, so you have to check them. But they're dry, you can't check them. If you try to check them, the leaves are going to fall off. Eitz HaTorah Kamashmalan, you must soak them, not just Eitz HaTorah Kamashmalan, you must check them. You can't make a bracha on them without checking them because they don't have a cheskes kashrus, and in order to check them, you have to soak them in warm water to soften them up. V'imloi yimtza, and if you don't find mishulashim, yitol b'loi bracha ayin sham. The Chayyadim suggests that then you should take the hadas that's not mishulish, and you should take it and shake it. You make the nanuim, take it together with your lulav and aravas and your esrig, but take it without a bracha. You can't make a bracha on it. If it's a hadas shoita, so you have these shitas that say that a hadas shoita is okay, so you'll be mekayim the mitzvah according to them, but you cannot make a bracha on it because we don't paskin that way. Now there's a very interesting sharetzion over here, is Tezvav, where the Chavetz Chaim brings down the rest of what the Chayyadim says on this inyan. And he says, Oid Kasav Sham, the Chavetz Chaim writes further over there, Harbe men paiskim rishayim svirlu da'asa lahaisif ba'she'ene avos, va'over habal taisif. According to us who hold that the hadas shaita is not an anaf eitz avos, so then what's it doing together with the esrog and the lulav and the arava? And some Rishonim hold that you would be over on the Isser of Bal Taisif. Because what are you doing? The Torah Dosha says that you should take 4 minim. And the Torah Dosha delineates the minim. Now you're adding on another branch of a different min. This is not an Anaf Eitz Avos. So what is it? I don't know, it's a myrtle branch. But that's not one of the Daled Minim. So you're adding on a different min. That would be the Isser of Bal Taisif. So, Achein, however, says the Chavetz Chaim, what you could do is you could make a stipulation. Mahani T'nai, you could make a T'nai, be'ezit darvish achoshe she'ena b'chlal hadas, if you have a hadas shoita, and you're worried about these shitas that say that the hadas shoita is not an anaf eitz avos, and maybe you could be over a bal taisif, so you make a T'nai. And what do you say? Im hu hadas, if it is a hadas, eitze boy, I should be eitze the mitzvah. V'evlav, if it's not a hadas, Kevin, it should be considered like a stone. On the tzad that it's not really a hadas, it's as if I'm not taking it. Then you're not over about taisif, the same way we find in the context of certain halachas when it comes to wearing 2 pairs of tefillin to be mekayim certain shitas. Okay. Fine. That brings us to the end of Sif Gimel. Let's go now to Sif Daled. Now, Sif Daled is largely a repeat of a halacha that we learned in Sif Aleph, but there's maybe an interesting addition in the Mishnah Berurah. So, says the Mechaber Sif Daled, Yotzu harbe b'kein echad. Let's say on each level of the hadas, you don't have 3 leaves, you have much more than 3 leaves. So the example that Mechaber is going to give is you have 7. You have 7 leaves coming out on each level. Now, we said already in Sif Gimel that what's anaf eitz avos, you have to have at least 3 leaves on each level. But if you have more than 3 leaves on each level at the same level, that's fine. So if you have 7 leaves coming out on each level, and they're all on the same level, that's not a chesaron of anaf eitz avos, that's fine. So yotzu harbe b'kein echad. Let's say you had a lot of leaves coming off on each level. But v'noshru mehem, but now the leaves fell off. Ad shelo nisharu elo shloisha b'kein echad. Now you only have 3 on each level. So we already discussed this case in Sif Aleph. If you had 7 on each level, and now on each level 4 leaves fell off, so you lost the majority of the leaves. You had 7 on each level, you lost 4 on each level, but you still have 3 left. Says the Mechaber, that's kosher, that's fine. Afilu nosher rubam, even if you lost the majority of the leaves. Going, for example, like the case that I just gave you. Shahayu shiva, you had 7 on each level. V'noshru behem arba, and 4 fell off on each level. V'nisharu shloisha. So now all you have is 3 on each level. So you had 7 on each level, you lost roiv. You lost 4 on each level. Says the Mechaber, that's okay, because it's still anaf eitz avos. In order to be mekayim anaf eitz avos, all you need is 3. So what do I care that you had 7 and you lost 4? I didn't need 7. So you lost 4, you still have 3, it's still considered anaf eitz avos. Now, at this point you might be wondering, this is really a repeat of Sif Aleph. In Sif Aleph, on Kuf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph, we said, Noshru roiv olav, if the majority of the leaves fell off, im nishtayru shloisha alin b'kein echad, if you still have 3 at each level, kosher, it's kosher. Now, one answer to that is, like we said in the Mishnah Berurah yesterday, that Sif Aleph was a verbatim quote from the Rambam. And that's why, if you read the text of Sif Aleph, we don't see in the description of this case any mention of 7. It's written a little bit funny. It says b'kein echad on one level, where really it means on each level, but that's a verbatim quote from the Rambam. Now, here in Sif Daled, the Mechaber is expanding upon the Rambam, and he's giving us the exact case. The exact case is you had 7 on each level, you lost roiv, you lost 4, but you still have 3. So it's still anaf eitz avos, it's still kosher. Now let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah's cut to Zayin. V'noshru mehem, haynu afilu haya b'chol oirech hadas kein. Even if the entire hadas was this way, on the entire length of the hadas, you had 7 leaves on each level, 4 fell off, you only have 3 left, it's fine. And this is true even though you lost the majority of the leaves. Explains the Chavetz Chaim why. Because since the bottom line is you still have 3 leaves on each level, adayin avos karina be. So this is still called an anaf eitz avos. Because in order to be an anaf eitz avos, you need 3 leaves on each level encircling the branch. And you have that. You have 3 leaves on each level encircling the branch. So it's an anaf eitz avos, and it is fine. Now, says the Chavetz Chaim, a very interesting thing, and you have to follow this logically. Aval, however, im nish'aru rak shnayim. Let's say you had 7 on each level, and on each level, 5 fell off. So now you only have 2. Okay, puzzle. Now, that's puzzle. Now, everybody's saying, okay, Rabbi Weiss, that's not a chiddush, like Why not? We know, we just went through this whole Siv Gimel, that a hadas that only has 2 leaves on each level is puzzle. And Rabbi Weiss, you explained it very well. The reason it's puzzle is because it's not anaf eitzavos. 2 leaves on each level doesn't encircle the branch. It's not anaf eitzavos. So okay, if you had 7 on each level and you lost 4, you still have 3. It's anaf eitzavos. It's kosher. If you had 7 on each level and you lost 5, now you only have 2. So it's not anaf eitzavos. And that's why it's puzzle. Okay, I get that. No big chiddush over here. Says the Chavetz Chaim, there actually is a chiddush. And the reason there is a chiddush is because there is a case where you have a hadas that lost leaves, and you only have 2 leaves on each level, and the hadas is still kosher. What's that case? Let's say you had a perfectly beautiful hadas mishulish. You had 3 leaves on each level. V'nashar echad mikol kain, and now you lost 1 leaf on each level. V'nishar rak shnayim, so that now you only have 2 on each level. Hiskimu kama achroinim la'akshir. Many achroinim say that hadas is kosher. Again, the achroinim say, let's say you had a beautiful hadas mishulish that had 3 leaves on each level, and you lost 1 leaf on each level, and now you only have 2 left on each level. A lot of achroinim say that that's kosher. In contrast to the case that the Mishnah Berurah just gave me, where you had 7 on each level, you lost 5, and now you only have 2, that's puzzle. Huh? In both cases, leaves fell off, and at the end of the day, you only have 2. In the first case, where you started with 7 and you left with 2, that's puzzle. Why is it puzzle? Because it's not anaf eitzavos. But if you started with 3 and you lost 1 and you left with 2, then it's kosher, according to many achronim. Why? What's the chiluk? So explains the Mishnah Berurah, it's a very cute chiluk. Sham shani. In the case where you had 3 and 1 fell off and you left with 2, that case is different. Shenishtayir al kol panim roiv hakein. Because if you had 3 and you lost 1, you maintain roiv. You still have 2 out of 3. Verubai kikulai. If you still have roiv, now we can apply the halacha of roiv. We could say rubai kikulai. We had a beautiful hadas mishulish. We had 3 on each level. Yeah, but you lost 1 on each level. Yeah, but we still have roiv. We still have 2. Rubai kikulai, it's as if we still have 3. But if you had 7 and you lost 5 and you left with 2, you can't use the lamdas of rubai kikulai. You don't have roiv. So now it's not rubai kikulai, and it's not avos. Masha'ekin hacha shenashru rubam. If you lost roiv, you can't say rubai kikulai. So be'inan al kalpanim she'yishtai shiur avos. So then you need at least 3 so that you have avos. Then we don't need rubai kikulai. If you had 7 and you lost 4, I don't care that you lost roiv. It doesn't matter. I didn't need kulai. I didn't need 7. I have 3. It's still avos. But if you only had 3, and you lost 1 and you have 2, you can say rubai kikulai. Very sweet Mishnah Berurah, very lumdish. Again, I want to just point out what we're saying over here. In both cases, in one case, you had 7, you lost roiv, you only have 2, it's puzzle. Why is it puzzle? It's not anaf eitzavos. 2 leaves doesn't make anaf eitzavos. But if you had 3 on each level and you lost 1 on each level, and you only have 2, well, it's still not anaf eitzavos. What do you mean you only have 2? Yeah, but now you could apply rubai kikulai. Because I only had 3, I still have 2. Rubai kikulai, it's as if I have 3. Lemaisa, physically, it's not anaf eitzavos. Doesn't matter. Rubai kikulai. Halachically, it is anaf eitzavos, at least according to those achronim. Okay, we'll stop over here, or up to Sif Hey. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. The schus of limud HaTorah should be making against Klal Yisrael. We should send Yeshua's for voice, Parnas, and Shidduchim to all those in need. And we should be zeicher to see the Bias Gal Tzedek, B'meherav Yameinu. Amen. Be well.